Chapter 1. The Meeting of Strangers. It was a rainy Tuesday morning when Juliet first saw him. The kind of rain that makes people seek shelter in the tiniest of cafes. The kind that fills the streets with that crisp, fresh scent and the world with a soft, muted rhythm. Juliet had always loved the rain, its sound, its calm. She could lose herself in its quiet comfort for hours. She hadn't planned to stop at the cafe, but the cold, biting wind had made her head for the nearest door. As she stepped inside, the warmth and rich aroma of fresh coffee enveloped her. The cafe was a small, tucked-away place on the corner of a cobblestone street. It had that homey, almost magical atmosphere, the kind that invited you to slow down, to forget the chaos of the outside world. And then she saw him. He was sitting at the farthest corner of the cafe, near the window, with a book in his hand. His eyes were intent on the pages, but Juliet couldn't help but notice how the dim light from the chandelier above him made the soft curls of his dark hair almost glow. There was something quiet and contemplative about him, a stillness that drew her in like a magnet. Without realizing it, she found herself walking toward his table. Her mind raced. Why was she drawn to him? She had always considered herself a solitary person, someone who preferred the comfort of her own thoughts to the chaos of others. But there was something about this stranger that made her curious. His presence was calming, almost like an anchor in a world that often felt like it was spinning too fast. As she passed his table, she noticed a slight shift in his posture. His eyes flickered up from the book, and their gazes met for a fraction of a second. Juliet's breath caught in her throat. She quickly looked away, her cheeks flushing as she moved to the counter to order her coffee. Was that just a momentary glance? Was it nothing more than a chance encounter, a flicker of eye contact in an otherwise ordinary day? But why did it feel so much like something more? Juliet took her coffee, retreating to an empty table near the window, trying to shake the strange feeling gnawing at her chest. But her thoughts kept drifting back to him, the stranger who sat across the room. She tried to focus on her book, but her mind kept returning to that fleeting moment. She had never been one to believe in love at first sight, but in that moment, it felt as though the world had shifted. She couldn't explain it, but she felt an undeniable pull, as though she was meant to meet him. Suddenly, she felt a presence at her side. Startled, she looked up to find the stranger standing before her, holding his book in one hand and a steaming cup of coffee in the other. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said, his voice low and warm, "but I couldn't help but notice that you were reading the same book I am." He smiled, a small, genuine smile that made his dark eyes sparkle. "I don't mean to sound forward, but I thought it might be fun to discuss it over coffee." Juliet was taken aback. Was he really talking to her? Was this really happening? She hadn't been expecting this, not in the slightest. She had imagined he was the type who kept to himself, lost in his world of books and thoughts. Still, there was something about him that made her want to open up. Maybe it was the way he smiled, or the calm aura he carried. Or maybe it was the unexpectedness of the moment. She hesitated for a second, unsure of how to respond. Sure. I'd love to." He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, setting his coffee on the table and opening the book to the page where he'd left off. Juliet tried to calm her racing heart, wondering why she felt so nervous, so eager to get to know this stranger who had just walked into her life. "So," he began, "what do you think of the book so far?" She glanced at the cover, then back at him. "I think it's fascinating, actually. It's a mix of history and fiction, but I like how the author plays with the boundaries between them. It feels almost like a hidden truth waiting to be discovered." His eyes lit up at her response. "Exactly. I've been obsessed with this book for weeks now. There's something about it that pulls you in. I've read parts of it over and over again, trying to decipher the clues hidden within the story." Juliet smiled, feeling a spark of connection between them. It was rare to meet someone who shared the same passion for the things she loved. They spoke for hours about the book, about life, about anything and everything. Juliet had no idea how much time had passed, but she didn't care. For the first time in a long while, she felt truly present, like the world had narrowed down to just this moment, just the two of them. As the rain outside began to taper off, leaving the city streets glistening in the soft glow of the fading daylight, Juliet realized that something had shifted. Something deep inside her. She had started her day thinking it would be just another ordinary Tuesday, but here she was, sitting across from a stranger who felt like he had always been a part of her world. When they finally parted ways, it was with a promise to meet again. He gave her his number, though neither of them said the words out loud, as if it was a silent understanding between them. "Same time, same place?" he asked with a knowing smile. "Same time, same place," she replied, her heart fluttering in a way she hadn't expected. As she left the cafe, the rain now gone, Juliet couldn't help but feel that something extraordinary was beginning to unfold. Maybe it was just a coincidence, maybe just the magic of a rainy day. But Juliet had the feeling that their paths were meant to cross, and this was only the beginning of something much deeper than she could have ever imagined. Chapter 2. The puzzle unfolds. The next few days felt surreal. Juliet couldn't shake the memory of the man at the cafe, the way their conversation had flowed so effortlessly, how his eyes seemed to lock onto hers with a quiet intensity, as if they had known each other for much longer than just a few hours. She found herself returning to the cafe every morning, hoping to catch a glimpse of him again, but as each day passed, the seat at the corner table remained empty. At first, she told herself it was just a coincidence. Maybe he was busy, or perhaps he hadn't been as invested in the conversation as she had. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. There was something about their meeting that felt destined, as if the universe had conspired to bring them together. On the fourth day, Juliet walked into the cafe, expecting to sit in her usual spot by the window, but her gaze immediately landed on him. He was sitting at the same corner table, the book in his hand, his dark curls falling over his forehead in the same way she remembered. The sight of him sent a warm rush through her chest. Without thinking, she made her way over to his table. He looked up just as she reached him, and his face lit up in recognition. "I didn't expect to see you again so soon," he said with a smile, his voice as warm and inviting as before. "I guess we're both creatures of habit," Juliet replied, her heart racing slightly. "Mind if I join you?" He gestured toward the empty chair across from him. "Of course. I'd be glad for the company." As she sat down, Juliet's nerves seemed to dissipate. There was something so easy about being near him, so comfortable, as though this had been part of the plan all along. She couldn't explain it, but it felt right. "So, what's the book today?" she asked, nodding toward the novel in his hands. He glanced down at the pages and smiled. "It's actually the second part of the one we were talking about the other day. It's getting even more intense. I'm curious to see how it ends." Juliet nodded, intrigued. "I've been meaning to pick it up, but I've been so caught up with work lately. I just haven't had the time." "Work can be draining," he said, his tone sympathetic. "But sometimes you have to make the time for the things that matter. Otherwise, you miss out on all the moments that make life interesting." His words lingered in her mind, the way he spoke with such conviction, like he truly believed in the importance of living fully. Juliet hadn't thought about it that way before. She was so caught up in the routine of her daily life, work, obligations, tasks, that she had forgotten what it meant to truly live, to enjoy the small moments. "So," he continued, his eyes locking onto hers, "what's your story, Juliet?" She blinked, caught off guard by the question. "My story," she echoed. "Yeah. I mean, we've been talking about books and the world around us, but I don't know much about you yet. Tell me something about yourself." There was a pause, a beat of hesitation. Juliet had always been a private person, careful about what she shared with others. But for some reason, she felt a pull to open up to him. Maybe it was his easy smile, or the way he listened intently when she spoke, making her feel like her words mattered. "Well," she began, taking a deep breath, "I guess there's not much to tell. I'm just, well, a regular person. I work as an editor for a publishing house, and I spend my days reading manuscripts and working on deadlines." It's not as glamorous as it sounds. He raised an eyebrow. I don't know. Sounds pretty exciting to me. You get to immerse yourself in stories every day. True, she admitted with a smile. But sometimes it feels like I'm just going through the motions, you know? Like I'm stuck in this loop, and I don't know how to break free from it. His gaze softened, and he leaned forward slightly. I get that. Life can sometimes feel like you're stuck in a rut, and the days blur together. But what if I told you there's more? More to life than just work and routines. Her heart skipped a beat at his words. There was something about the way he said them, like he knew exactly how she was feeling. Like he had felt the same way before and found a way to break free. What do you mean? She asked, intrigued. He took a sip of his coffee before responding. His voice quieter now, more earnest. I mean, sometimes we get so wrapped up in what we think is the right way to live, that we forget what we actually want. We stop asking ourselves what truly excites us, what makes us feel alive. But the truth is, the world is full of possibilities, Juliet. You just have to be brave enough to step out of your comfort zone and chase them. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and profound. Juliet couldn't help but feel like he was speaking directly to her soul. It was as though he saw something in her that she hadn't even recognized in herself. The idea of stepping outside her carefully controlled world was terrifying, yet exhilarating. She could feel her heart racing at the thought. I'm not sure I'm ready for that, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He smiled gently, his eyes softening. That's okay. Takes time. But I think we all deserve to feel alive. Take chances. To open ourselves to new possibilities, even when it scares us. There was something about his confidence, the way he spoke so naturally, that made Juliet wonder if he was speaking from experience. Had he taken those risks? Had he lived the life she only dreamed of? Before she could ask, a light buzz interrupted their conversation. Juliet glanced down at her phone, realizing it was already time to go. I have to get to work, she said reluctantly, standing up and gathering her things. But I really enjoyed talking to you. It's nice to be reminded that there's more to life than just what's in front of you. He stood up as well, offering a small smile. I'm glad we met, Juliet. Don't forget to take those chances. Sometimes the most unexpected moments can change everything. As she walked out of the cafe, a strange mix of excitement and fear swirled inside her. She had met someone who had given her a glimpse into a life she hadn't considered, one where the ordinary could turn extraordinary, simply by being brave enough to embrace the unknown. Chapter 3. The Invitation. The next morning, Juliet woke to the sound of her phone buzzing on the nightstand. She had barely slept the night before, her mind racing with thoughts of him. She had tried to tell herself that it was just a fleeting connection, a conversation that would fade into the routine of her everyday life, but something deep inside her told her this was different. She had never felt so drawn to another person so quickly, and yet, it felt like everything about their meeting was meant to happen. She reached for the phone, still half-dazed, and saw the message. It was from him. I know this might sound sudden, but I was wondering if you'd like to join me for an adventure this weekend. I promise I'll keep it simple, just a walk through the park and a stop for coffee. No expectations, just good conversation. Let me know what you think. Her heart skipped a beat. An adventure. Was he serious? The idea of stepping out of her comfortable, predictable world and into something unknown was both exciting and terrifying. She had always been the cautious type, never one to take risks, but something about his invitation made her feel ready. Ready for something new. She stared at the message for a long time, her thumb hovering over the keyboard. Should she say yes? She had never been one for spontaneous decisions. But this wasn't just anyone. This was him, the man who seemed to understand her more in a few days than most people had in years. There was an undeniable pull, a magnetic attraction that made her want to say yes, to step outside her bubble and see where this could go. I'd love that, she typed, her fingers moving faster than her mind could process. When and where? She hit send before she could second-guess herself. A few minutes later he replied. His message light and full of anticipation. How about Saturday at noon? We'll meet at the big oak tree in the park by the fountain. I'll be the one with the blue jacket. See you then." She smiled to herself, her nerves bubbling up again, but this time they felt like butterflies, exciting and filled with possibility. She couldn't believe it. She was going to meet him again. This time, it wouldn't be in the familiar, comforting surroundings of the cafe. It would be in the open air, in a place where anything could happen. And maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of something bigger than either of them could have imagined. Saturday arrived quickly, and as the morning sun cast its golden rays over the city, Juliet found herself standing in front of her closet, unsure of what to wear. She wanted to look nice but not too eager, casual but not careless. After what seemed like an eternity of indecision, she settled on a simple yet elegant dress, a soft, flowing number in a muted lavender color. It was comfortable, but it made her feel confident. She paired it with a light jacket and slipped on some comfortable sneakers. As she left her apartment, the excitement started to build. She couldn't help but wonder what it would be like to spend time with him outside the confines of the cafe. Would the connection they shared still be there? Would the conversation flow just as effortlessly? Or would it feel awkward, forced even, now that they were stepping into uncharted territory? She arrived at the park just a few minutes before noon, the soft rustling of the trees in the breeze providing a peaceful backdrop. She spotted the fountain immediately, a grand, stone structure at the center of the park, with water cascading down its sides in a constant rhythm. And there, just a few paces away, was the oak tree. It was massive, its branches sprawling wide and its roots twisted and knotted into the earth. She walked toward it, her pulse quickening. He was already there, standing with his back to her, wearing a blue jacket just as he had promised. Juliet felt a surge of warmth in her chest. Even from behind, there was something so familiar about him, as if she had known him for much longer than just a few days. He turned around just as she reached him, and his face broke into a smile that made her heart flutter. "Juliet," he said, his voice soft and full of warmth. "I'm so glad you came." "I wouldn't miss it," she replied, her smile matching his. For a moment, there was an awkward pause as they both seemed to take each other in, as if trying to read the other person's thoughts. He gestured toward the tree. "Shall we sit? I thought we could start with a walk. The park is beautiful today." Juliet nodded, her nerves easing in his presence. They sat on the stone bench beneath the oak tree, the leaves overhead rustling gently. For a while, they just sat in silence, each of them lost in the beauty of the moment. "So," he began, breaking the stillness, "tell me, what's one thing about you that most people don't know?" Juliet raised an eyebrow, intrigued by the question. She had always been the type to keep her private life just that. Private. She wasn't used to opening up so easily, especially not to someone she barely knew. But there was something about him that made her want to share, made her want to be vulnerable. "I guess," she hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "I've always been afraid of taking risks. I've lived a safe life, work, responsibilities, staying in my comfort zone. I've never been the kind of person to step outside of it and chase after something unexpected." He looked at her with a soft, understanding gaze. "I think that's something a lot of people can relate to. But I believe that sometimes, it's those risks that lead to the most rewarding experiences." There was something in the way he said it, so genuine and sincere, that made her heart swell. He wasn't just talking about taking risks for the sake of it. He was speaking from experience, from a place of understanding. "What about you?" she asked, turning the question back on him. "What's one thing most people don't know about you?" He looked down at his hands for a moment, as if gathering his thoughts. Then he met her eyes. "I've always been searching for something," he said, his voice quiet. "Something more than what I've been told to want. I've never really fit into the mold that society expects me to. I guess you could say I've been trying to find my own path." Juliet felt a wave of connection wash over her. She hadn't expected to hear something so raw, so real. In that moment, it felt as though they were two souls sharing the same silent understanding. The conversation continued, each word drawing them closer, and for the first time in a long time, Juliet allowed herself to be completely present, to embrace the possibilities that this moment held. The rain, the routine, the mundane, all of it felt like it was slipping away, replaced by something far more profound. Chapter 4. Beneath the surface. As the hours passed, Juliet found herself lost in the rhythm of the conversation, completely forgetting about the world around her. The park, with its soft sunlight filtering through the trees, felt like a sanctuary, a space where nothing mattered except the two of them. He spoke about his travels, the places he had lived, the experiences that had shaped him, and Juliet listened intently, fascinated by the richness of his life. It wasn't just the stories that captivated her. It was the way he told them with such passion and honesty, as if he wasn't afraid to reveal his true self. There was a vulnerability to him that was rare and beautiful, a kind of openness that made Juliet feel like she could trust him with parts of herself she had never shared with anyone. "So," he said, taking a sip of his coffee, "tell me, what's your idea of a perfect day?" The question took Juliet by surprise. She had never really thought about it before. Most days felt like they were filled with obligations, tasks, and responsibilities. But now, sitting here with him, she realized she longed for something more, something that didn't involve a to-do list or deadlines. She smiled thoughtfully. "I guess my perfect day would be one where I'm not thinking about anything other than the moment. Something simple like walking in a park or reading a good book on a lazy afternoon. No distractions, no pressure. Just peace." He nodded, his gaze intense as he looked at her. "That sounds wonderful. I think the world has a way of making us forget what truly matters, like taking the time to slow down and just breathe." Juliet's heart skipped a beat at his words. They were so simple yet so profound. It was as though he had been speaking her mind, articulating the thoughts she'd never fully processed. She realized then that he had a way of pulling out the thoughts she kept buried deep inside, the ones she didn't even realize were there. "I think you're right," she said softly. "I spend so much of my life caught up in things I feel I should be doing, that I forget to do the things that actually bring me joy." He reached across the bench, gently brushing his fingers against hers. The touch was brief, but it sent a ripple of warmth through her. She glanced at him, her heart pounding in her chest. "I don't want you to forget about what makes you happy, Juliet," he said quietly. "You deserve to feel free, to live the life you've always wanted. You don't have to live by anyone else's rules." Her breath caught in her throat. His words were so honest, so caring, and yet, they stirred something deeper inside her. A longing, a need for something more than the predictable life she had been living. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the conversation hanging between them, both lost in their own thoughts. "So," he said, breaking the quiet, "tell me, what's something you've always wanted to do but haven't had the courage to try?" The question felt like an invitation to open up, to expose the parts of herself she had kept hidden. For the first time in a long time, Juliet didn't hesitate. She knew exactly what she wanted to say. "I've always wanted to travel," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "To see the world, experience different cultures, meet new people. But I've always been too scared, too tied down by work and responsibilities. I've convinced myself that I don't have the time or the freedom to just go." His eyes softened as he listened to her. There was no judgment in his gaze, only understanding. "You don't have to go right now," he said gently. "But one day when you're ready you can. The world is so much bigger than what we see every day. And it's waiting for you to explore it." Juliet smiled, her heart swelling at his words. There was something so comforting about the way he spoke. It was as if he was giving her permission to dream, to let go of the fears that held her back. "I think I needed to hear that," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I've spent so much time worrying about the future, about what I should be doing, that I've forgotten what it feels like to just want something for myself." He reached over again, this time taking her hand in his fingers gently intertwining with hers. "You don't have to have everything figured out right away. Just take one step at a time. Start small. And when the time is right, you'll know." But don't let fear stop you from living the life you deserve. Her heart fluttered at his touch, and she squeezed his hand in return. For a moment, the world felt still, as if time itself had paused to give them this perfect, quiet moment. "I think I'm starting to understand," Juliet said, her voice soft but full of certainty. "Maybe it's time I let go of my fears and start living for me." He smiled, his eyes lighting up with warmth. "I think that's the first step to finding the happiness you've been searching for." They sat there, hand in hand, watching as the sun slowly dipped lower in the sky. The park around them seemed to glow with the soft light of the evening, and for the first time in a long time, Juliet felt at peace. She didn't have all the answers, but she knew one thing for sure. Whatever this was, whatever connection they had, it was just the beginning. As the evening wore on, they decided to take that walk through the park, side by side, talking about everything and nothing. The air was cool now, the first hints of autumn beginning to make themselves known. Juliet couldn't remember the last time she had felt so alive, so free. And as they walked, the world around them seemed to fall away. All that mattered was the connection they shared, something she wasn't sure she fully understood yet, but something she was willing to explore, to discover. There was still so much left to uncover. But for the first time in a long time, Juliet was ready to embrace the unknown. Chapter 5. The Unspoken Truths. The next few days flew by in a blur. Juliet found herself replaying every moment from that afternoon in the park. The touch of his hand, the quiet exchange of words that made her feel like she was the only person in the world who mattered. She thought about it constantly, about him, about what this connection might mean. Every time her phone buzzed with a notification, her heart skipped a beat, hoping it was a message from him. But there was silence. He hadn't texted since their walk in the park. And despite the warmth and ease they had shared, Juliet couldn't shake the feeling of uncertainty that settled in her chest. Was it possible that what had felt so real between them was just a fleeting moment? Could it be that their time together was meant to remain a beautiful memory, tucked away in the back of her mind? She found herself overthinking every small detail, wondering if she had said something wrong, if maybe he was having second thoughts. Was he truly interested, or was he just being kind? The self-doubt crept in, and she tried to push it aside, but it lingered. It wasn't until the following weekend that she heard from him again. The message came through late on a Saturday morning. "I know it's been a few days, and I hope I didn't leave you wondering, but I've been thinking about you. Would you like to meet again? I promise I won't make you wait as long this time. Let's go somewhere different." Juliet stared at the message for several moments, her heart racing in her chest. This wasn't just a polite check-in. This was him reaching out. And it felt so much more than just a casual invitation. It felt like a true desire to see her again, to continue whatever it was that had started between them. She smiled to herself, feeling a rush of excitement mixed with a sense of relief. "I'd love to. Where are we going?" He replied almost instantly. "There's a little art gallery downtown. It's one of my favorite places. Would you like to join me?" Art had always been a bit of a mystery to Juliet. She had always admired it from afar, but it wasn't something she'd ever truly immersed herself in. The idea of exploring it with him was both exciting and nerve-wracking. What if she didn't know what to say? What if the silence between them grew awkward? But something told her that this was not going to be just another day. Not with him. The way he made her feel so at ease, so open. She couldn't help but think that whatever came next, it would be worth it. She sent a quick reply. "Sounds perfect. I'll meet you there." The day of their date, Juliet dressed carefully, wanting to look casual but still put together. She chose a soft blouse in pale blue, paired it with dark jeans, and opted for comfortable flats. It was a simple outfit, but she felt confident and at ease. She wanted to feel comfortable in her own skin. As she walked toward the art gallery, the familiar rush of nerves returned. What if the connection they'd shared on that afternoon was only temporary? What if there was nothing more between them? But then she thought of the quiet reassurance in his message, the way he had expressed his desire to meet again. She had to let go of her insecurities and enjoy the moment. When she arrived at the gallery, she saw him standing outside, looking up at the building. He was dressed casually in a light jacket and jeans, but there was something about the way he stood there, confident yet relaxed, that made her heart flutter. He turned and spotted her right away, his face lighting up with a genuine smile. "Juliet," he said warmly, stepping forward to greet her. "You look stunning." She blushed, caught off guard by the compliment. "Thank you," she replied softly, her cheeks still tinged pink. "Shall we?" he asked, gesturing toward the entrance. They stepped into the gallery together, and Juliet immediately felt the quiet, contemplative atmosphere wash over her. The art on the walls was vibrant, full of life and emotion. There were portraits, abstract pieces, and landscapes, each piece telling its own story. Juliet couldn't help but be drawn into the beauty and complexity of it all. He led her through the exhibits, their conversation flowing easily as they discussed the art. She felt her nerves begin to fade as they explored the pieces, his insights and opinions opening her eyes to things she hadn't noticed before. He wasn't just telling her what he thought. He was inviting her to see the world through his eyes. "So, what do you think?" he asked, as they stopped in front of a large painting, a chaotic swirl of colors and shapes. Juliet studied it for a moment, trying to grasp the meaning behind it. "I'm not sure," she said honestly. "It's intense. I think it's about conflict. Maybe the artist was trying to express some sort of inner turmoil." He nodded thoughtfully. "I can see that. I think it's also about finding beauty in chaos. Sometimes, we need to embrace the messiness of life to truly understand what it means to live." She looked at him, intrigued by his interpretation. "You've thought about this a lot, haven't you?" He shrugged, his gaze shifting to the painting again. "Art has a way of revealing things about us that we might not realize. Sometimes it's not just about the image, but about what it makes you feel." There was a pause as they both stood in front of the painting, lost in thought. For a moment, Juliet felt the weight of the silence between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was peaceful. "I think that's why I enjoy coming here," he continued. "It's not just about the art itself, but about how it makes me see the world differently. And being here with you, sharing it, it's like we're both on this journey of discovery together." Her heart skipped at his words. There was something so sincere in the way he spoke, and it touched her more than she could explain. She had never considered art in that way, never thought that something so simple could stir up such profound emotions. "I'm glad you brought me here," she said softly. "I've never really taken the time to stop and look at things this way before." He smiled, the warmth in his eyes deepening. "I'm glad you're here." They continued to explore the gallery, the world outside fading into the background. For the first time in a long time, Juliet felt truly present. She wasn't worried about what might happen next. All that mattered was the connection between them, the way he made her feel seen and understood. Chapter 6. Secrets Unveiled. The days that followed felt like a delicate dance, one where Juliet found herself walking a fine line between hope and hesitation. The art gallery visit had been an eye-opening experience, and while the connection between her and him had grown, there was something lingering beneath the surface that she couldn't quite grasp. She felt drawn to him, but at the same time she was wary. She knew there was more to him than he let on. For the first time, she couldn't just enjoy the ride. There was a weight on her chest, a quiet sense of unease that had begun to shadow her thoughts. There were moments when she thought she saw him falter, small, almost imperceptible glances away, pauses in his speech, moments when he seemed to hold something back. Juliet couldn't ignore the feeling that he was hiding something, and she wasn't sure if it was something that mattered or if she was simply overthinking things. One evening, a week after the gallery visit, they arranged to meet again. He suggested a quaint little cafe near the river, the kind of place that felt intimate and warm, a refuge from the rest of the world. Juliet arrived early, sitting at a small table by the window, watching the city lights flicker on as the sun set behind the skyline. She had no idea what to expect tonight, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. When he arrived, he seemed different, There was an intensity in his eyes, a kind of seriousness that didn't match the light-hearted tone he usually carried. As he sat down, Juliet couldn't help but notice how much he was avoiding her gaze. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, her voice laced with concern. It was a question she had asked him several times before, but this time, there was an underlying sense of urgency in her voice. He nodded, but the gesture didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm fine," he said, but Juliet wasn't convinced. She could feel the weight of his silence pressing against her, and for the first time, the easy conversation between them felt strained. They sat in silence for a moment, neither of them knowing quite how to break the tension. Finally he spoke. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, his voice quiet, almost hesitant. Juliet's heart skipped a beat. This was it, the moment she had been dreading and longing for at the same time. She wasn't sure what to expect, but whatever it was, she could feel that it was important. "What is it?" she asked, her breath catching in her throat. He looked down at the table, his fingers nervously tapping against the surface. "I haven't been completely honest with you," he confessed, his words coming slowly, as though he were carefully choosing each one. "There's something in my past, something I haven't told you about." Juliet's heart raced. She wanted to reach across the table, to hold his hand and assure him that whatever it was, it wouldn't change how she felt. But she stayed still, watching him, her mind racing with a million questions. "I've been trying to figure out how to tell you," he continued. "But every time I think about it, I get scared. Scared that you'll walk away, that it will change everything between us." Juliet leaned forward, her eyes softening with empathy. "You don't have to be scared. Whatever it is, we can face it together." He hesitated for a moment before taking a deep breath, his gaze lifting to meet hers. "Before I came to this city, I was married. It wasn't a great marriage," he said, his voice tinged with regret. "We both made mistakes. But that's not the hardest part. The hardest part is that she's still in my life. We didn't exactly have the cleanest break." Juliet froze. The words hung in the air, the weight of them heavy and thick. She had thought about his past, but this was something she hadn't expected. The idea of him having been married, having a whole life before her, felt like a cold splash of reality. It was something she wasn't sure how to process. "I know this probably changes everything," he said quickly, sensing her shock. I didn't want to tell you until I knew for sure how I felt about you. I didn't want to drag you into something messy." Juliet felt the blood drain from her face, her heart hammering in her chest. She wasn't sure what to say, how to respond. Part of her wanted to ask every question, demand answers about why he hadn't told her sooner, but another part of her, the part that still believed in the connection they had, just wanted to understand. How is she still in your life?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration and guilt clouding his expression. "We're not together, but there are complications. She's been trying to reconnect, trying to pick up where we left off. I've been avoiding her, but lately, it's been hard to keep pushing her away." Juliet processed his words, her mind spinning. She had never expected this. Never imagined that the man who had seemed so open, so willing to share his heart with her, would be holding on to something so complicated. It was a raw, messy truth, and Juliet didn't know what to make of it. "I understand," she whispered, the words feeling thick in her throat. "I think I need some time to think about this." His eyes softened with regret. "I never wanted to hurt you, Juliet. I care about you more than you know. But I couldn't keep hiding this from you." The silence between them stretched long, the weight of his confession hanging in the air. Juliet felt a flood of emotions, confusion, anger and sadness, but also something else. It was as if his honesty had cracked open a door she didn't want to close, a door to a future that suddenly seemed uncertain. As the evening wore on, they sat there in silence, the conversation stilled, and the cafe's bustling noise faded into the background. Juliet stared out the window, trying to process everything, unsure of what she was feeling, but certain that this moment was one she couldn't just ignore. Chapter 7. Torn between two worlds. The next few days felt like a blur to Juliet. She couldn't stop replaying his confession in her mind. The fact that he had been married, the fact that his past was still haunting him, everything seemed to collide in a way that left her unsure of where she stood. Part of her wanted to jump in and fight for what they had, while another part told her that she needed space to process. She didn't know which part to listen to. For days, she avoided contacting him. She needed time. Time to understand what his confession meant for them, for their budding connection. Her friends noticed the change in her mood. Her preoccupation with something just out of reach. They could see the worry in her eyes, the hesitation in her voice when she spoke about him. "Juliet, you have to talk to him," her best friend Laura insisted one evening when they were sitting at the coffee shop. "You can't just leave it hanging like this. Either you're willing to face this together, or you're not." Juliet stared into her coffee cup, her fingers tracing the rim. She knew Laura was right, but every time she thought about the situation, her heart would sink. She didn't know if she could be with someone who still had such ties to his past, someone who hadn't completely untangled himself from his old life. It felt like a complicated web, and Juliet wasn't sure if she wanted to get caught in it. "I don't know what to do," she admitted softly, her voice filled with uncertainty. "He's not the man I thought he was. I thought I knew him, but it's just so complicated." "I get it," Laura said, her voice softer now. "But people are complicated. And you have to decide if his honesty is something that you can work with, or if you can't. But you won't know unless you talk to him." Juliet sighed deeply, feeling the weight of the decision bearing down on her. She was caught in the middle, torn between what her heart wanted and the reality of what his past meant. She had fallen for him, but now she had to decide if she was willing to accept all of him, even the parts that were messy and unresolved. The following morning, after hours of turning the situation over in her mind, Juliet knew what she had to do. She had to talk to him. She had to face the truth, his truth, and figure out if they could still move forward. She sent him a message. "Can we meet today? I think it's time for us to talk." His reply came quickly, and it was exactly what she had hoped for. "Of course. I'll meet you wherever you want." They decided to meet at a small park near Juliet's apartment, a quiet space that had always given her peace. When she arrived, he was already there, sitting on a bench beneath the shade of an old oak tree. He looked up as she approached, his face softening with a mixture of relief and anxiety. "Juliet," he said, standing as she reached the bench. "I'm so glad you're here." She smiled faintly, though the smile didn't quite reach her eyes. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, and Juliet couldn't help but feel a little vulnerable. She sat beside him, her hands clasped together tightly in her lap. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me," she said, her voice steady, though her heart was racing. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, and I feel like we need to clear the air." He nodded, his expression serious. "I know, and I've been thinking about it too. I don't want you to think that I was hiding anything from you. I didn't want to scare you off. My past is messy, and I didn't know how to bring it up without losing you." "I get that," Juliet said, her eyes softening. "But I think you should have told me sooner." "Get it now, though." "Do. The fact that you've been open about it means a lot to me." "I didn't want to burden you with all of that," he admitted, his voice full of regret. "I didn't want you to see me as someone broken, someone who can't move forward. I thought I could leave it behind, but it's not that easy." Juliet looked at him, her heart aching for the man in front of her. He was trying so hard, trying to be someone she could trust, but his past was so intricately woven into his present, and she didn't know if she was strong enough to help him untangle it. "I don't want to just walk away," she said softly. "But I need to know that you're not still holding on to her, to that life. I need to know that you're ready for something new." He took a deep breath, his eyes meeting hers with a vulnerability that left her breathless. "I've been holding on to it for far too long. But I want to move forward with you, Juliet. I want to start fresh." I don't want to live in the past anymore. There was a pause as Juliet absorbed his words, weighing them carefully. She wasn't sure if she could completely trust him just yet, but she could see the sincerity in his eyes. It wasn't just about his words, it was about the way he spoke them, the raw emotion in his voice that suggested he was ready to face his future, not as a man haunted by his past, but as someone who had learned and grown from it. I want to believe you, she said quietly, her voice trembling just slightly. But I need time. I need to know that this isn't just a temporary fix, that you're not just trying to escape your past by diving into something new with me. He nodded, his gaze never leaving hers. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. I'm here, ready to be with you, if you'll have me. For a long moment, Juliet simply looked at him. Her heart conflicted but her mind beginning to clear. She had never imagined that something as simple as love could be so complicated, but she also realized that sometimes, the messiness of life was part of what made it worth living. They both had baggage, they both had things they needed to work through, but maybe, just maybe, together they could make it work. I'm not sure where this will go, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But I want to try. I want to see what happens. He reached for her hand, his touch gentle but firm. That's all I ask. We'll take it one step at a time together. Chapter 8. The Struggle of the Heart. The weeks that followed were a mix of uncertainty and growth, a push and pull that neither Juliet nor him fully understood. They had agreed to take things slowly, to give each other space to breathe, yet every day felt like a new test of their resolve. Juliet found herself caught between the desire to trust him and the lingering fear that his past was still a part of him, one he couldn't simply outrun. The more she saw him, the more she realized how deep the cracks ran. His past was something that shaped him, but it didn't define him. At least, that's what she wanted to believe. Their meetings became more frequent, but always with an undercurrent of tension, a quiet anxiety that neither of them could fully shake. They went on walks in the park, shared dinners at quiet, intimate restaurants, and spent countless hours talking about everything and nothing at all. And yet, despite the hours they spent together, something always felt just beyond reach. One afternoon, Juliet sat by the window in her apartment, the sunlight casting long shadows across the room. She had a book in her lap, but she wasn't really reading. Her mind kept drifting back to him, to the way he looked at her with such longing and vulnerability. He had opened up in a way that no one else had before, and yet she felt like there was still more hidden beneath the surface. Could she really trust him with her heart, or was she setting herself up for heartache? Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her reverie. She looked down and saw his name lighting up the screen. A sense of anticipation washed over her. It had been a few days since they'd seen each other, and she hadn't expected to hear from him today. She swiped to open the message. I need to talk to you. Can we meet later? Juliet's heart skipped a beat. The urgency in his words was unmistakable, and the unease she had felt before began to creep back into her chest. Was this about his past again? Or was it something else? She quickly typed a reply. Of course. When and where? Same park as last time. 7 p.m. I'll be waiting. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she tried to decide how to feel. Part of her wanted to dismiss the anxiety bubbling inside her, but the truth was, she couldn't ignore it. He had been acting distant the last time they met, and now it seemed like something had shifted again. She had to know what it was, no matter how afraid she was of the truth. The evening came quickly, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, Juliet found herself standing at the edge of the park, the last rays of light casting a warm glow over everything. She spotted him almost immediately, sitting on the same bench beneath the oak tree where they had shared their most recent conversation. He looked up as she approached, his face tense, his hands nervously clasped together. Hey, she said softly, sitting down beside him. Her heart was racing, but she forced herself to remain calm. What's going on? You sounded like something was wrong. He hesitated before looking at her. His expression clouded with something Juliet couldn't quite place. His gaze shifted away for a moment before he finally spoke. "Juliet, there's something I haven't told you," he began, his voice low, almost strained. "And I think it's time you knew the whole truth." Her breath caught in her throat. A cold knot tightened in her stomach. Was this it? The moment when everything would fall apart? "I'm listening," she said, her voice steady despite the fear that was creeping up her spine. He ran a hand through his hair, his fingers trembling slightly. "What I told you before about my past, it's not the full story. There's more, and I've been hiding it from you because I didn't want to lose you. But I can't keep doing this." Juliet felt a wave of uncertainty crash over her. She had been afraid of this. She had known there was more to him than he had revealed, and now the truth was coming to light. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He took a deep breath, as though gathering the courage to say what he had been holding back for so long. "I didn't just have a marriage. I had a family, a life I walked away from. I thought I could escape it all, but the truth is, I still have ties to them. My ex-wife. She's pregnant again, and she's asking me to come back, to help raise the child." Juliet's world tilted on its axis. She had known there was more to his past, but this was a bombshell. The thought of him going back to her, of him starting a new life with someone else, crushed something inside her. She could feel her pulse quickening, her thoughts spiraling as she tried to process the information. The air felt thick with tension, and for the first time in a long time, Juliet didn't know what to say. She had thought they were making progress, but now this was a truth she wasn't prepared for. "I don't know what to say," she said, her voice shaky. I thought we were building something here. But now I feel like I've been living in a dream." He reached out, his hand brushing hers, but Juliet pulled away, her heart hammering in her chest. "No," she whispered. "I can't. You can't ask me to accept this. You've kept so much from me. I've trusted you, and now you're telling me that you might go back to her." He looked at her, his face etched with guilt and pain. "I never wanted to hurt you. I've been trying to sort it all out, but it's not that simple. I'm torn, Juliet. I don't know what to do. But I care about you more than you know." Juliet stood up abruptly, her emotions crashing down on her all at once. "You're not the man I thought you were," she said, her voice breaking. "I need space. I need time to think about all of this." Before he could respond, she turned and walked away, her mind swirling with confusion and hurt. She didn't know what was more painful, the betrayal of his lies or the realization that maybe their connection had always been built on shifting sand. As Juliet walked home, her thoughts were a chaotic storm. She had trusted him. She had opened herself up to him in ways she hadn't with anyone in years. But now it felt like everything was slipping through her fingers. Was this the end of their story? Or was this just another obstacle they had to overcome? Chapter 9. The Crossroads of the Heart. The next few days felt like an endless cycle of confusion and pain for Juliet. She had never experienced such emotional whiplash before. One moment, she had felt like she was opening herself up to a future with someone she truly cared about. The next, she was facing the harsh reality of the man he still was, someone who was bound by ties to a past that didn't seem to want to let go. She couldn't stop thinking about his confession, the fact that his ex-wife was pregnant again, and the fact that he was torn between his past responsibilities and his feelings for her, made everything seem so much more complicated. Every time Juliet closed her eyes, she saw him sitting there, looking at her with those sad, conflicted eyes, as if he didn't know where his heart truly belonged. And the worst part, she still cared for him, deeply. Juliet had spent hours walking around her apartment, pacing in circles, her mind a whirlpool of questions. Could she forgive him? Could she trust him again after the things he had kept hidden from her? Part of her wanted to scream at him, to tell him he had broken her heart. The other part just wanted him to hold her and promise everything would be okay. But she knew that wasn't the kind of promise he could make. Not anymore. A week passed before he reached out to her again. The texts were brief but persistent, nothing too overwhelming, but enough to show that he wasn't willing to let things end without explaining himself further. Can we talk? I want to explain truly. I'm not trying to make excuses, but I need to see you. I can't leave things like this. Each time she received a message, her heart sank. She wanted to be angry, to be resolute in her decision to walk away. But something inside her kept pulling her back. What if he truly was torn? What if the man she had come to know wasn't the man who had caused her pain? In the end, she couldn't resist. They arranged to meet in the same park where their conversations had always been full of hope. She wasn't sure what she was expecting, but as soon as she saw him, sitting on that familiar bench, a sense of dread filled her. He looked up as she approached, his eyes searching her face as if trying to gauge whether she was open to hearing him out. His expression was a mixture of desperation and guilt, and in that moment, Juliet realized just how much he had been carrying on his shoulders. "Juliet," he began, standing as she reached the bench. His voice was hoarse, like he had been holding back emotions for far too long. "I know I've hurt you. I can't even begin to imagine how much this has hurt you." She didn't speak right away. She had so many questions, so many thoughts swirling in her head. But right now she couldn't find the words. She simply sat down beside him, her hands resting in her lap as she waited for him to continue. "I've been selfish," he continued, his voice trembling slightly. "I wanted to move on to escape the mess I created, but in doing so I hurt you. I lied to you about what was truly going on. And I'm sorry. I didn't want to put you in this position. I didn't want you to feel like you had to choose between me and everything else." She nodded slowly, her eyes focused on the ground. "But that's exactly what I feel like I'm doing. I feel like I'm being forced to choose between you and my own peace of mind. I trusted you and now it feels like that trust has been broken." "I know," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I don't blame you for feeling that way. I wouldn't blame you if you never wanted to see me again. But I need you to know that I'm not the same person I was when we first met. I'm not asking for you to fix me, but I need you to know that I'm trying. I'm trying to be better." Juliet met his eyes then, her heart pounding in her chest. The sincerity in his gaze was unmistakable. He wasn't trying to manipulate her. He wasn't offering empty promises. He was simply offering the truth, his truth. It was raw, it was vulnerable, and it was painful to hear. "But what about her?" Juliet asked, her voice quiet but firm. "What about your ex-wife? You said she was pregnant again, and I can't pretend that doesn't matter. How do I know you're not just going to go back to her because it's easier?" He closed his eyes for a moment, and Juliet could see the weight of his internal struggle. "I won't lie to you. I'm still figuring it out. I've been in contact with her, and there are days when I feel like I'm being pulled in two directions. But the truth is, I'm not the man I used to be. Changed. And I don't want to go back to that life. I want to move forward with you, Juliet. If you'll have me." The words hung in the air between them, thick with unspoken meaning. Juliet wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust that he was being honest and that his past no longer had a hold on him. But part of her still couldn't shake the fear that the man she loved was a man who wasn't truly free. "I don't know what to do," Juliet confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "I want to be with you. Do. But I don't know if I can keep living in this limbo, not knowing what the future holds." He reached for her hand then, his grip gentle but firm. "I understand. I don't want to pressure you. I just want you to know that I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere unless you tell me to." The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was a silence of understanding, a silence of two people realizing they were at a crossroads, both unsure of what the future held but willing to face it together. "I need more time," Juliet finally said, her voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside her. "I need to figure this out for myself. But I promise I won't shut you out. I just need space." He nodded slowly, his eyes softening. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here when you're ready." As Juliet walked back to her apartment, her mind was a tangled mess. She had asked for time, but what did that time really mean? Could she truly walk away from the possibility of love just because his past was complicated? Could she live with herself if she never gave him a chance to prove that he was more than the mistakes of his past? Juliet didn't know the answers yet, but she was certain of one thing. She wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. Time stretched out before Juliet like a vast ocean, its waters both soothing and tumultuous, inviting her to dive in but reminding her of the depth that lay beneath the surface. The days since she had asked for space had been a blur, a quiet chaos in her mind as she wrestled with everything she had learned. There were moments of clarity where she believed that love, true love, was worth the risk. But there were also moments where doubt clawed at her chest, reminding her of how fragile the trust she had built with him was. For the first time in a long time, Juliet found herself looking inward more than outward, searching for the answer to a question she hadn't been ready to ask. Could she truly forgive him? Could she trust him enough to build a future, knowing the weight of his past still lingered like a shadow? As the days passed, the tension in her heart only grew. She didn't want to make decisions based solely on fear, but neither could she ignore the sting of betrayal she had felt when she learned the full truth. She was torn between two versions of the man she cared for, the one who was bound by responsibility and history, and the one who was trying to carve out a new path with her. The decision had to come soon. Juliet couldn't keep living in the limbo of indecision, and she knew that for both their sakes, the truth had to come out. She needed to find her own peace, whether it was with him or without him. One evening, as dusk settled over the city, Juliet found herself back in the park. It was the same park where they had shared so many important conversations, but tonight felt different. The air was heavy with anticipation, and as she walked along the winding paths, she couldn't shake the feeling that something momentous was about to happen. As she rounded the corner, she saw him. He was sitting on the same bench where they had met so many times before, looking as lost as she felt. There was a sense of finality in the way he sat, as though he had made his peace with the possibility of losing her. His gaze met hers as she approached, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The silence between them was filled with years of unspoken feelings, of moments they hadn't fully shared. "You came," he said finally, his voice soft but steady. "I had to," she replied, her heart racing. "I've been thinking about everything you said. About your past, about your ex-wife, about the choices you're facing." He looked down for a moment, his hands clenched tightly on his lap. "I don't want to lose you, Juliet. I've never wanted that. But I can't ask you to wait around while I figure out what I'm doing. I can't keep you hanging on, hoping that one day things will just fall into place." She took a deep breath, trying to steady the whirlwind of emotions inside her. "I don't want to wait around either. But I can't keep pretending that I'm okay with everything. I need to know where your heart is." For a moment, he seemed to struggle with his words. His gaze shifted, looking anywhere but at her, as though searching for the right way to explain what he had come to realize. Finally he spoke. "My heart is here," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "It's with you. I've tried to make sense of everything, to rationalize my feelings, but the truth is, what I have with you is something I've never had before. You've shown me what it means to really live, not just survive. I want to build something with you. But I need you to know I'm not perfect. I'm still figuring it out. I'll always have ties to my past, but it's you who makes me want to move forward. You make me want to be better." Juliet's chest tightened as she listened to him, the weight of his words sinking deep into her soul. She had come here tonight to make a decision, to end it or to move forward with him. But in that moment, she realized something she hadn't fully understood before. Love wasn't about having all the answers. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about choosing to move forward together, despite the flaws, the mistakes, and the uncertainties. "I don't know if I can forgive everything," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't know if I can just forget the hurt. But what I do know is that I can't let you go either. I don't want to. I want to try. I want to take this chance." His eyes softened and he reached for her hand, holding it gently in his. "That's all I ask for. Chance. To prove to you that I'm here, that I'm not going anywhere." Juliet nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear those words, how much she needed the reassurance that they could still make it. There was still so much to work through, but she wasn't afraid anymore. "I don't want to pretend that it will be easy," she whispered, "but I want to try. I want to see where this can go. Together." And in that moment everything shifted. The weight that had been pressing down on her heart for so long seemed to lift, if only slightly. She had made her choice, not based on certainty but on trust, on the belief that love was worth the struggle, that even the most fractured hearts could heal if given the chance. They sat together on the bench, hand in hand, as the night slowly enveloped them. The city hummed softly in the distance, but for Juliet and him, the world felt still, just for a moment. In the silence, they both knew they were standing at the beginning of something new, something fragile but beautiful. And that was enough. Then,